I'll ask anybody's question but yours, if you're an idiot.
My wife can score more than 2 buckets on 11 shots because I know my wife will at least shot fake 1 time.
I want they bury me upside down and my critics can kiss my.
Welcome on in. It's Made for March here. Tyler Rocky and Tim Leonard. We're back. It's been a whole summer of hibernation, but we are back. Tim has returned from his Baltimore Orioles banishment, and we're ready to talk all things college basketball and everything that's going on in the world of college hoops. We've got so much to get to. We're going to begin our Tears of Joy a little late this year, but we're still going to get them to you. And today we start with the Woodens and the Guy Lewises, the teams that we believe can contend for a title and teams that we think are going to be knocking right on the doorstep as well this season. Listen, we're coming off of a fantastic season last year where there were 2 powers from start to finish. It was Baylor, it was Gonzaga. This year it feels like the field is a little bit more open as we head into the season.
Yeah, it does. It's an exciting time, right? I mean, this is maybe my favorite time of the year where there's just endless possibilities for who is going to step up, who's going to take the mantle. There's always things in the college basketball preseason rankings that we get terribly wrong. And typically it's been, recently at least, some of these powerful schools, the Kentuckys, the UNCs, the Dukes, struggling despite having good preseason rankings. I guess the number one question this year is how much of those struggles last year was based on COVID and them using a lot of uber-talented freshmen and them not being able to have the full offseason. And will those teams get back to where they were? And also, in the case of Duke and UNC, how are they going to do as they shift into new eras here?
All right, so let's start with the Guy Lewises here. And again, we're trimming down our list a little bit. 5 of each. We're making it even tougher on us to give out these lists here. So we'll start with Guy Lewis's. Give me your first one. Who do you have number 1 on your team on the outside looking in?
My preseason number 1 this year, as it was last year, and honestly, it may have been the year before that, is Gonzaga.
So we're diving into the Woodens here. We're diving into the Woodens.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't listening clearly.
You know what?
Would
Let's
you say,
do it.
Guy Lewis?
Let's do it. Dive in. Because guess what?
Okay.
I'm matching you. I'm going stride for stride with you here. I love Gonzaga. They're my preseason number 1 as well.
All right, great. Well, I was over here trying to fix with my mic here and wasn't really listening, so I apologize. I'm being a bad co-host.
You never are.
This
you never are. This
is getting used to it again.
This is Rust versus Rest. Rust is winning out here.
Right, and you don't have to worry about that with the Baltimore Orioles, I guess, but I can tell you firsthand, this is a lot more fun to talk about than the struggling Baltimore Orioles baseball team. But anyway, Gonzaga, yes, I think they are the best team in the country again this year because it's a very talented freshman class joining some very talented returners. They did lose Jalen Suggs. They lost Corey Kispert, but Drew Timmy's back. He's the preseason player of the year in most places that you look at it. And his front court mate is the number 1 recruit in the country, Chet Holmgren, who I think is probably the most intriguing player in college basketball this season. I cannot wait
your
to
team
watch
Chet
him play.
over Team Paolo.
Yes, I mean, just because he's a freak at like 7 feet, right? The way he plays is just so fascinating and so unique.
I gotta say, I found myself in a Paolo rabbit hole on YouTube the other day. There are very few players I've seen in my life that play with such power and such finesse.
Yes.
We're going to have the Coach K retirement tour all season long. At least we're going to be able to watch Paolo during it. And if K takes away all the shine from Paolo, then there's no other way I want to see him sent out. Like, that would just be the ultimate way to see K leave. Anyway, getting back to Gonzaga here. Yeah, I mean, Chet's a freak. He's a unicorn. He's one of those guys that is generational. You don't see guys like him. And the fact that he's teaming up with the best player that's returning to the sport this season with Drew Timme, and you also bring in another talented freshman, Hunter Salas, that he'll see a lot of times starting. I'm also kind of intrigued by one of their transfers, too, Rasir Bolton.
Yeah.
Best player from Iowa State from a season ago. And I think even though Iowa State hasn't really been good during Bolton's time, it's kind of one of those things like you see it in the NBA when guys team up. You want to wonder if it's empty calories or not. And I think this is the perfect situation for him to come into this Gonzaga team and be able to showcase some scoring. And he doesn't have to do it every single night. And I think in college that goes a long way.
Yeah, they got Nebhard back as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
I think that is a very underrated
Right.
return as well. Like I think losing Joel Ayayi is a lot bigger than some people thought, but having Nemhard come back in to kind of play that supporting role, I think is going to play pretty solid dividends for them.
Right. And we forget, or maybe some people don't forget, but they were a historically great college basketball team last year, right? Like they beat teams badly in the regular season that
And
were
beat
really
good
quality
teams badly. Yeah.
Yes. So I just don't see it falling that far this year. I don't really see a world where they're not a number 1 seed in March, given that they're going to run through their non-conference schedule again. And you can make jokes about that, and you can make jokes about how they haven't really gotten it done in March, but they kind of proved people wrong up until they played Baylor last year, which was a disappointing way to conclude the season. But yeah, I just think there's no world where Gonzaga is not at the top of the AP poll rankings for most of the season again.
2 little Gonzaga tidbits I want to get to. First, with Mark Few, going to miss the first 3 games, and that includes the game against Texas, which is, I think, going to be one of the really, really fun opening weekends of games. You're going to have Gonzaga, Texas, no Mark Few. A little concerning with what happened there and how punishment was handed down. So Mark Few charged with the DUI, and he's suspended not by the NCAA, who's handing out suspensions and postseason bans for teams that are doing much, much less. No, he's suspended by the university for 3 games, so he's going to miss the first 3 games. Dixie State, Alcorn State, you could have you and I coaching on the sidelines, and I think we'd take care of business. But that Texas game, you might see an early blemish there without Mark Few there. And let's not forget, you're losing your top assistant who's gone on to take the Arizona head coaching job in Tommy Lloyd, too.
Right. No, that's a good point. And that's something that maybe when we talk about Illinois, if we do today, I know I have them on one of my 2 lists here. That's another team that has lost a lot of assistants. Sometimes I think that's overlooked, honestly. I feel like those assistants, while they may sometimes be overrated recruiting-wise, they're still very important in other aspects as well.
In practice,
yeah,
people would be surprised how many coaches just roll out the balls and monitor from there.
I know. And schematically helping with plays. It seems like in the case of Illinois, that was a big part of what those 3 assistants did. I mean, Illinois lost their entire staff. So it's stuff like that sometimes when you just go and look through the rosters and the players that are coming back, you can overlook those facts. But Tommy Lloyd, that's a huge loss for Gonzaga.
All right, let's move on to number 2 since we're in lockstep here with number 1. Are you going in order here?
Yeah, I kind of ranked them internally.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me hear your number 2.
I said Kansas. I don't know if that's controversial. Who's your number 2?
My number 2, I've got Illinois at number 2.
Wow. Okay.
I really like what Illinois, but I do have Kansas on my list. I have them at number, what do I have them at here? I have them at number 4 on my list.
Yeah, I think we can get to Illinois a little bit later because they're in a Guy Lewis tier for me. I'm not totally sold on them, and I think that was kind of an argument we had last year. We were always sort of on different sides of Illinois for the most part.
That's right.
At least from what I remember. But Kansas, sticking with them, I think they have a nice mix of these guys are back. These guys have been in Bill Self's system, the McCormicks, the Wilsons, guys like that. And then they have a couple new pieces who I think are intriguing. Remy Martin, who apparently, I believe it was in the exhibition game, I saw some stuff that he's coming off the bench, which might be Bill Self's way of sending a message a little bit. But that's an intriguing piece from Arizona State. So I just like that in an era of the new transfer portal, which that's an overarching theme of this college basketball season. It's going to be interesting to monitor how these heavy transfer teams play versus the teams that maybe didn't have as much activity in the transfer portal this year. I think Kansas is at a nice sort of balance in the middle there of adding some nice new pieces, some freshmen, of course, and some talented veterans as well.
Yeah, I look at Kansas too, and I mean, Ochai Agbaji is reaching the Quentin Grimes, Armando Bacot levels of guys who you thought would have left a lot earlier, but here we are, and he's still sitting in college basketball. With Agbaji, I really like what he can bring to the table. I've always liked him throughout his career, and even back to like his freshman, sophomore years, I thought, that guy seems like a guy that would bolt a little bit earlier, maybe even if he wasn't ready. And the fact that he's still with the Jayhawks really intrigues me.
Yeah, they got 4 starters back. I guess the only starter that they lost was Marcus Garrett, maybe. And then Bryce Thompson's a pretty tough loss, the way that he went to Oklahoma State. That's a guy who definitely was in for probably a sophomore leap this year that we typically see, but
Right.
a lot of intriguing players are coming back. McCormick is back in the middle. It seems like those Kansas big men just always get better and better each year, and Bill Self does a great job developing them. And then, yeah, Abaji is someone that does it on both ends of the court and is honestly probably one of the more underrated players in the country, in my opinion.
So I look at this Kansas team and their ability to score from a season ago. You've got 7 guys on your roster now that are coming back with essentially 10 points per game from a season ago. You're starting 5, all registered about 12 per game. Then you bring in Jalen Coleman Lands, who's on like his 15th school now. And then you have Christian Brown, who a season ago averaged 9.7, who is knocking on the door, and he's your 3-point marksman on the team. There's going to be a lot of scoring. Here's my one worry with Kansas is defensively at the guard position. Remy Martin and Joseph Yusufu are both 6 foot. You're going to need a lot of Christian Brown and a lot of Jalen Coleman Lands because if you face a team with some bigger guards, you're going to have some troubles.
I would also say the thing with Kansas is they don't maybe have that true alpha, like an elite college basketball player on this year's roster. Could Abaji be an All-American potentially?
I think Martin could be that guy.
Yeah, but if he's not even starting, and I don't know, Remy Martin for me was always sort of fill up the stat sheet, didn't do a whole lot else at Arizona State, so I'm interested to see how he translates. And
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've been off on people like Mac McClung was in the same category last year. He went to Texas Tech, of course, and I thought he was like a very good all-around player at Texas Tech. So how much of that was the system at Arizona State?
Right, and it's like what we see in the NBA with guys like Devin Booker, Zach LaVine, and we see what happens when they get supplementary help. You all of a sudden turn into really good teams. And I don't know, I'm looking forward to see Remy Martin in this next stage. I really am. I think he's one of my more intriguing players in the entire country. I'm not going to bill him as an All-American, but it's someone to look out for. Also worth noting with Kansas, Jalen Wilson is going to miss the first 3 games as well after the suspicions of DUI with him. So it's another thing that Kansas is going to have to go into these early portions of the season, and that includes the Champions Classic to open up the year against Michigan State. Getting to Illinois, who is number 2 on my list of Woodens here, here's why I like Illinois. You bring back obviously one of the best players and a guy that you probably didn't think you were going to have on your roster heading into this season in Kofi Coburn. I mean, talk about the drama. He's also, by the way, going to miss the first 3 games of the season because, and this is probably a really silly slap on the wrist that the NCAA is handing out, one of the odder things, but at the same time, you could have said, I mean, Kofi, could you just wait a few days? I mean, I don't know how far he missed the deadline by, but regardless, he's going to miss the first 3 games of the season, and that includes the game against Marquette. But I really like what they bring back, which is crazy to think you lost 3 pretty instrumental players to what you did, especially Ayo, your best player from a season ago and a Player of the Year candidate, Adam Miller, who was supposed to be that guy who was going to take sophomore steps, and then Georgi Bajanosvili, who was a really instrumental piece for you off the bench. But I'll tell you what, I kind of like how they're filling things in here. Very rarely do you have the ability to potentially go All-American to All-American. And I think that's what Illinois has in the transition from Ayo Dosunmu to Andre Curbelo.
Yeah, so that's the question mark for me. I don't know if I'm as high on Curbelo as you may be. And I think the turnovers were a big reason why last year which is expected, right? He was a freshman playing a lot.
Coming off the bench, too.
Yeah. How much is he going to improve as a sophomore is so big, and how much can he be that creator that they so desperately need now? Because you laid out all the guys they lost. The part that scares me about Illinois is Ayo Dosunmu just did so much for them last year. He was their crunch time guy. He was a big defender for them. I mean, you see what he's doing with the Chicago Bulls. He's off to a good start there. He's really been probably one of the more underrated players in terms of an all-around impact on a roster in recent memory in college basketball for me. He was obviously doing it scoring-wise, and he was the second best player in the country probably last year behind Luka Garza, and there were cases to be made that he was the best
we even
player.
argued, is he the top guy on the team?
Right. So I guess what I have concerns about is one, you lose to Sumu, and now you don't necessarily have a lot of guys that have proven a ton to fill his spot. Curbelo definitely has shown flashes. Can he do it for an entire season? Can you replace a good chunk of that production that was lost? And then the other thing is Kofi Cockburn now becomes your number one guy. And as talented and as good as Cockburn is, and this sounds kind of silly because we're talking about an All-American, I just liked him a lot better when he was a number 2 because he doesn't pass a lot, he struggles on defense, and he gets in foul trouble at times as well. And I don't really love leaning on a big guy as much as they're probably going to have to lean on him.
Here's where I would counter that is I think that with a guy like Curbelo, and again, you bring back Trent Frazier too, who I think is going to be an underrated piece. He's another one of those guys who's taken advantage of a COVID year, and the fact that he's going to get an extra season of college basketball, I think he's a guy who's going to absolutely exploit that and be one of those, oh, I'm just older than you and automatically better than you guys in the Big Ten. And with Frazier, DeMonte Williams, another guy who's doing that. I think there's some other guy. Here's a guy who's intriguing me off the bench for this Illinois team, and that's Coleman Hawkins. 6'10", long and rangy as all hell. And even though the numbers weren't there from a season ago, Brad Underwood's, I think, going to try to use him a little bit differently. I think they're going to try to use him almost like a stretch 4 sort of guy. And if you can stretch the floor and put a lot of size out there and some shooting, Curbelo's a better facilitator than what Io was. And while he's not nearly the scorer that Io was and probably will never be that, I think you give Andre Curbelo spacing with 3 shooters and an All-American big, and to me, that spells a lot of trouble for the Big Ten and the rest of the country.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I love watching Curbelo play. I think he's honestly got a tremendously high ceiling at some point. I just don't know if he comes close to reaching that as a sophomore. I think he has to grow a lot in terms of consistency as a playmaker and being that guy that is leading the team night in and night out. He's going to get there at some point. I just don't know if it's this year. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they lost pretty much their entire assistant coaching staff, which I think is a big deal and probably being overlooked by some. And they're in such a tough conference. I just look at how the Big Ten stacks up again this year. I think you can make a case, and I don't know if I'm all the way there to say it, but I think you could make a case that they're the 4th best team in their conference when you factor in Ohio State, Purdue, and Michigan are also in their conference.
Right. Yeah, no, it's again, the Big Ten's going to be a lot of fun to watch this year. All right, who do you have at number 3?
I got Villanova at number 3, which again is sort of leaning on experience, leaning on culture there with Jay Wright. I think they basically return everyone except for JRE, who did a lot for them, so that's a big loss. And we know what happened to Gillespie in the tournament. Hopefully he gets back up to speed after the injury and all that. It just feels like Villanova's in a nice spot that is almost pretty similar to what Clemson had going, at least entering this year in football in the ACC, where Nova's in the Big East. They've got some decent teams there that they're not like in such a bad conference that it's hurting them, but at the same time, they're typically going to have a pretty easy conference schedule compared to others and take care of business and continue to, if anything, just sort of stay where they are in the polls or rise up. And it's going to be interesting because they do play UCLA next Friday on the 12th, which is one of those great early season games. They've got Baylor in the non-con. They've got Syracuse at a neutral site. We're going to find out about them, and they have struggled a little bit in the non-conference recently, but I just like what Jay Wright has there. I like the returning talent, and combine that with the fact that they're in a conference that sort of allows them to stay near the top of the AP polls and stay near the top of bracketology throughout the year.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you look at these teams that we mentioned, and the ones that have come out of our mouths so far, I think the locks, or at least the best chance, I shouldn't say locks, the best chances to be 1 seeds are Villanova and Gonzaga, and it largely comes down to the conference that they're in, and like you mentioned, there's just less room to trip up. Like, you talk about Illinois and Kansas, and we'll get to some other teams, I'm sure, where this also applies, but your margin for error is so slim. These are teams where your margin to slip up is so slim.
Yeah, I think what Villanova has coming back this year, combined with the situation they are in, makes them a dangerous team, really, for the next 3-4 years. And Jay Wright's already won 2 national titles not that long ago. So it's just, you're making a mistake to overlook them given the situation they're in and year out. I think they're always a pretty reliable bet to stay up there near the top of the polls.
All right, let's move on. My number 3 team here, I'm going to go with Purdue. I'll tell you this, Tim. I've already laid some money down for Purdue to win the national championship this year.
I love it.
I like this team. I shouldn't say like, because that's the wrong word. I love this team. I love everything about them. You've got Jaden Ivey, who I think can be a Big Ten Player of the Year in the conference. That's how good he is, and that's the step that I'm anticipating out of Jaden Ivey. You're bringing back Trevion Williams, and guess what? Trevion's role might be slightly diminished because of Zach Edey. Have you seen some of the numbers this guy's putting up in these secret scrimmages and stuff like that, and these preseason stuff?
Love the secret scrimmages. Isn't Edey like 7'5" or something?
7'4".
Yeah.
7'4", and he's figuring out how to play basketball. That should scare the ever-living hell out of everybody in the Big Ten Conference.
Yeah, so I didn't have Purdue on either of these lists, and mostly because I kind of viewed the guy Lewis as just pinpointing the highly ranked teams that I think are maybe overrated, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue, I think, is very properly rated in where I've seen them in the polls, which I think they're, for the most part, right around the top 10 in most of these preseason rankings, wherever you look. Also, I don't know if you remember this, but I feel like I have to sort of stick with Purdue, and I love that you've already put some money down on them, because remember last year we were talking about the NCAA first round?
That is right.
Right, and I picked them to lose to North Texas, and I was like, here's what's going to happen. They're going to lose, which they did, and then they're going to go on a huge run next year when all these great young players come back, and from that point on, it's going to be this redemption arc that I was already sort of procrastinating all the way last year. So I feel like I have to stick with that at this point after somehow they actually did lose to North Texas, and I was right on that part.
Well, there you go. There's your honorary Wooden. And this is a Purdue team that a season ago was really, really young. They were outside the top 300 in KenPom in terms of experience. And for them to still put together the stretch that they did, earning a 4 seed, going 13-6 in the Big Ten, we saw last year how much youth struggled. I mean, just look at Kentucky and Duke. Youth got kicked in the ass last year. And for this team to be that young, I think it's one of Matt Painter's better coaching jobs. And now all those guys have another year of experience. You look at a team that really didn't lose a whole heck of a lot either. I mean, they didn't get purged by the transfer portal and have all these guys coming back. No Nojel Eastern situations here. I mean, I think this is a team that is going to be really strong this year. You've got a senior point guard in Eric Hunter. You've got Jaden Ivey, who's a uber talented 2-guard running alongside him. You got some shooting with Stefanovic. I'm really looking forward to watching Purdue. I think they're going to win the Big Ten.
Yeah, and so my next team, to get into them, number 4, I had Michigan on my Woodens list, which, is this the year that the Big Ten finally wins a national title? Because we're just naming pretty much Big Ten teams.
They're going to have the most darts, probably. They're going to have the most darts to throw at the board. And
I guess last year, I think if memory serves, they all pretty much underwhelmed. We talked about Illinois earlier. They obviously
And we called
lost.
that last year.
Yeah.
We knew that. I mean, I don't think quite to the degree. I don't think we were picking necessarily. I know you had Houston in your Final Four, but I think we both were kind of in stride in saying that Illinois would at least get to the Elite Eight.
Yeah, I think Illinois was a surprise, although I remember thinking that Loyola Chicago had a decent shot there. I don't think I put in my bracket or anything like that. But yeah, this Big Ten, it's an interesting spot to sort of pick Woodens from the Big Ten because this is the best conference, but also, as we talked about earlier, you feel a little hesitant maybe to put Illinois as your number 2 or number 3 Wooden when they might be number 2 or number 3 in their own conference. And how much does that help versus how much does that hurt them? Then also, the track record's not great. I mean, when's the last? It was Michigan State, right? Is the last national
2000.
champion?
Yeah.
And
we're over 20 years now.
It's they always have darts, and this is another year they have darts. I think Michigan, sticking with them, they are pretty much the same team they were last year to me. A lot of these same players are back. Shondi Brown and Dickinson, of course, is a huge piece for them, and statistically, he's going to have another great year and probably put himself in the All-American conversation yet again. So, if Michigan was good last year, my thought process is they're probably going to be really good again this year, and that's kind of why I put him as a Wooden.
Here's my one concern with Michigan. Losing guys like Mike Smith and Isaiah Livers, I think that's going to hurt them a little more than people like bringing back Eli Brooks, but you want a guard with experience. And I know they had success last year going to the transfer portal and finding a Mike Smith. They're doing that again with Devontae Jones this year. And he's a guy who averaged almost 20 points per game. And for a guy who's 6'1", he also averaged 7 rebounds per game, which is really, really intriguing to see. But again, that's Coastal Carolina. That's not playing in the Big Ten where you've got bigs that can swallow up rebounds every single night. So I think you could probably take away probably 4 or 5 rebounds from him this year, but I need to see a facilitator. I don't know who that facilitator is going to be quite yet. Eli Brooks is another solid player for them, but and then you bring in a talented 5-star in Caleb Houston too. But again, the star of the show here is Hunter Dickinson.
Right. I think Jones is their X factor. That's not really a hot take or anything like that. He has to be basically what Mike Smith was for them last year. And I misspoke earlier. I said Chaundee Brown is back. He is not. He graduated. So they did lose a good amount. I mean, Wagner, Mike Smith, Chaundee Brown, Livers, Austin Davis even. They kind of had most of their starting 5 gone, and now it's sort of the Hunter Dickinson show. But I think my thought process on them still stands that Juwan Howard will probably get the most out of that team again, and they're in a very good conference. They're going to play a lot of really tough teams, and they're probably going to win a good chunk of those games in a really good league and continue to rise up the polls.
Here's what I'll say. They're the number 2 class in the country, too. They're going to be a young team, but they're going to be a damn talented young team with Hunter Dickinson also there, and then you've got some elder statesmen like Brooks on the roster and Brandon Johns as well. So we'll see how that youth is going to have to come along quickly. If they come along quickly, we could be talking about a team that is blown away the Big Ten Conference.
Right. So were they a Woodinner or Guy Lewis for you?
I had them in the Guy Lewis. I had them as one of my first teams on the outside looking in. So I've got, what do I have here? I've got 2 more teams. No, I've got 1 more team in my Woodens here, and that is Texas. Texas is an unbelievably intriguing team to me this season. I mean, new coach, you bring in a lot of new players in the transfer portal, a lot of talented players from the transfer portal too. Marcus Carr wreaked havoc on the Big Ten. I mean, the stuff of nightmares from Marcus Carr in the Big Ten Conference. Dylan Dessou from Vandy. Trey Mitchell was one of the most sought-after guys in the transfer portal. He's a big coming over from UMass. And then you've got guys just that are going to be coming off the bench that averaged over 10 points per game last season, like Christian Bishop coming over from Creighton, Timmy Allen coming over from Utah.
Timmy Allen's what, a top 5 transfer, and he's like the 5th guy you mentioned. It's loaded how many transfers they brought in.
Oh, and by the way, they're bringing back Courtney Ramey and Andrew Jones. Yes. And you finally get rid of the stink that is Shaka Smart from this program. That, to me, I think is going to go leaps and bounds above what people are talking about with this team. And to have the guards, to have some of the complementary stuff, to have the bench scoring, to have the coach that has gone to a national championship game in Chris Beard, running the show. I'm super excited for Texas this year. They're another team I've laid money down on to win the Natty.
Wow. I'm incredibly torn on this team because I think I'm probably the leader of the Chris Beard fan club. Like, he has always been a guy that I vouch for in the tournament when I'm picking games, in normal regular season games. I always vouch for him, and I think it's a tremendous hire by Texas, and he's going to do great things. And the question mark with him was, can he recruit, though? And already he is pulling in dudes not only on the recruiting trail, but these transfers that he's gotten. It's incredible, the load that he's put in. But now it becomes the part that I'm torn on, which is, how do they all fit together? Like, how is he going to keep all these guys happy? You've got a weird
You're going to give me there's only one ball out there argument.
Sort of, but I also just don't know if I love teams that are incorporating all these new pieces, and I'm staying away for the most part from teams that have done a complete overhaul in the transfer portal, and that's exactly what Texas has done. Now, Texas has brought in more talent than probably anyone else in the transfer portal, and they do have Courtney Ramey and Andrew Jones back, and they did win the Big 12 championship tournament last year. They got an easy pass where they didn't have to play Kansas because of a COVID issue, but they won the tournament. They went into the first round, and we all know what happened there. A big egg was laid, and Shaka Smart's out. Chris Beard's a huge plus compared to him, But I worry about how Chris Beard is going to use all these pieces. And I don't know if they exactly fit great or if it's just, hey, I incorporated as much talent as I could and we're going to go from there.
I will say this, if you're going to clog up one area of the floor, I'd rather it be the guards and the wings than the bigs. And that's exactly the trap that this Texas program has fallen into the last couple of years. When you look at who they lost from a season ago, Jericho Sims, Greg Brown, Kai Jones, all big guys. I would much rather have all that traffic at the guard position or the three than in the 4 and 5 spots. So I'm excited for Texas. All right, let's go through some of our Guy Lewis's here. I know we've already hit on a couple of them. Rattle off the rest of your list here because and then we can kind of break down the teams that we're looking at that are on the outside looking in.
So first off, Kentucky is my last Wooden, and quickly on them, I think that's probably a little higher than other people are on Kentucky. I think the stink
They're
of
my
last
first
year,
team out.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I just look at this roster, and I'm very impressed. And I know that they were terrible, terrible last year with a capital T, but at the same sort of token, I feel like a lot of that was the COVID season and just losing momentum and getting off on the wrong foot. There is talent here, and there's a nice mix of veteran pieces with some youth guys and some transfers, and they addressed their issues from last year. They actually have shooting this year. They actually have a true point guard this year, at least on paper, it seems like, with a couple different options there between Ty Washington, who's a very talented freshman coming in, Tavir Wheeler coming over from Georgia. So I really like Kentucky. I think they're going to win the SEC there this year. But my Guy Lewis category, I put UCLA in my Guy Lewis. We haven't named them yet. So,
I was surprised. Okay. I was surprised neither of us hit on them, but I'm glad we're in agreement there.
I think they're the one we have to talk about the most because I just don't buy that they should be a top 3 team or a top 5 team in the nation when there's another world where they maybe lost that first 4 game to Michigan State.
I 1,000% agree with you here.
Yeah, like what would they have been ranked if they had lost in the first 4, which went to overtime, by the way, and stats say that they were pretty lucky to go as far as they were in the tournament last year when you look at advanced metric stuff. So yes, they return literally everyone. Yes, they bring in Miles Johnson and add some good freshmen as well. I guess they don't return Chris Smith, who was hurt last year in the tournament anyway. But I liked UCLA last year, but they laid an egg. And if they had lost in that first 4 game, they wouldn't even be a top 30 team in these preseason polls. And they almost did lose. So yes, they went on the run, but I'm just not ready to put them as a top 5 team.
Yeah, people's scope is being framed off of a 4 or 5 game sample. Yeah, and that's my problem with UCLA right now is everyone is bought all the way in because of what they did on a little hot stretch in March. Listen, we watched UCLA over the course of the season, and they were solid, but they were never a team that we said, oh yeah, that's the sneaky team that can go on a run. And they very, very nearly were not that team. They're lucky almost that they saw a Michigan State team that, for the most part last season, was in complete disarray to open up the season. And Tom Izzo had all these questions. He was playing like 11 guys a night. They were that close to not being this sort of darling. And I'm with you. I'm not as high as them heading into this season. I know they bring back a lot, including Tiger Campbell, including Johnny Juzang, and Jaime Jaquez Jr. So
it's like everyone's
still
back,
not there,
which is great. But
yeah.
Let's not forget, for the first 30 games or whatever it was, 25 games of last year, they were just a very average team in a very average conference. And frankly, I think Oregon is a better bet to win that conference than UCLA. So,
bring in the spice.
UCLA is going to be a top 15, top 20 team for me, but I'm not ready to circle them in as a 1 seed or a Final Four team again.
I will say this, having front court depth for them this year is going to be big. Bringing in Miles Johnson, I loved watching him play at Rutgers last season. I thought I forget who he was going toe-to-toe with for minutes last year, and he accepted that bench role pretty well last season, and I think he's going to do something similar here with this UCLA team. Okay, so the rest of my Guy Lewis is here. I have Kentucky as my first team. Again, if we were to do what we usually do, Kentucky would be in my Woodens because I am that high on them. I think Ty Washington's going to be fantastic for that team this year. My other Guy Lewis's, we've brought up Nova, we've brought up Michigan. I want to throw some love Alabama's way. I think the Tide, what they've done in recruiting and just what we've seen out of Nate Oates too, in just reshaping what Alabama basketball is and how we think of Alabama basketball, I like it. And you're bringing back some pretty notable pieces as well. When you look at Javon Quinterly, Jaden Shackelford, I think was a bit of a surprise to come back, but I'm happy they brought him back. And then you're also bringing in a guy like Namari Burnett from Texas Tech, who I'm pretty high on as well.
Yeah, I would say Alabama, if they get through this season as a top 10 team again, then it's like, all right, Nate Oates, whatever you have on your roster, I'm backing you. Like almost to the Chris Beard, Jay Wright level. Because, well, they do bring back some pieces like you talked about, and Shackelford, I think, should be in the All-American conversation. They also lost some pieces, and they also are counting on bringing in some transfers, some new guys that they've been successful with in the past. So right now, I'm with you. I think they're going to do it. But this is kind of that year where we find out, is Alabama a legit college basketball power for the next 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, here's what I like about them, all right, is that even though they lost some defense, you lose Herb Jones, the defensive player of the year in the conference from a season ago. I mean, Jawan Gary can still play the hell out of the defensive side of the ball. Keon Ellis, I mean, he's just got these guys that are long. And not only that, but then you're bringing in some talented freshmen that are probably going to start for you too. When you look at guys like J.D. Davison, Charles Bediako, you've got talent and you've got experience on this team now. And you've got a team that has gotten a taste of what the NCAA tournament looks like. And that's a good thing.
Right.
And you've got a really good coach too.
Exactly. And I believe in what Nate Oates is doing there. So I'm with you there. I pretty much, all the other teams that were on my Guy Lewis list, I think we've hit on. I had Texas. I had Illinois, who we've talked about already. I also did, I don't know if I formally put them in my Guy Lewis, but they were on the brink for me. And I want to talk about them a little bit. It's UNC, just because I do think this is a big bounce back year for UNC. And as much as you can call me a homer on that regard, because of obviously
Tar Heel
my
Tim,
allegiances
back at it
there.
again.
And it is going to be an interesting year when you factor in Hubert Davis, but there's already been a lot of buzz about Brady Manick and the scrimmages, those secret scrimmages. It seems like he is shooting the heck out of the basketball, and I just like the way their roster added some shooting to the big position. I think Hubert Davis did a nice job, and it sounds like they're going to move Caleb Love to off-ball and pretty much just play RJ Davis as the point guard this year. I like that a lot better, and while Caleb Love was historically inefficient last year for the amount of volume he had and how poorly he shot, he was another freshman in a COVID season, and there's talent there somewhere, so I think he could be in for a bounce-back year.
We do have to hit on one team that we have not discussed during this, even though we've laid out everything. And it's fitting that you thought you were going to get away here with the last word in UNC. But we need to have a really quick Duke conversation.
Okay.
Only team in the ACC that does not return a double-figure score from a season ago. But they do bring in Paolo Banchero. And it is the Coach K retirement tour. What has to go right for Duke if they're going to get into the Final Four this year and send Coach K off into the sunset that way?
Gosh, I just got a pit in my stomach thinking about Coach K in his last year winning the national title. And I just saw, it flashed before my eyes. He's cutting down the net.
Did you see this? They did ESPN does a media day for their personalities. And someone asked Jay Billis, hey, what do you think about a Duke cast? We see the Manning cast. We see the college football playoff has the mega cast.
Boo.
A Duke cast of Jay Williams, Jay Billis, and JJ Redick, who just recently signed with ESPN.
Right.
I nearly projectile vomited all over my laptop when I saw that.
Yeah, that's a hard no. What's the American Idol, Randy Jackson? Is it Randy
Gonna be
Jackson?
a no from me, dog.
Yeah,
yep.
that's how I feel about that one. I would not watch. I would unsubscribe quickly on that front. I think Duke's going to be solid. I just... Look, they haven't been that good or lived up to expectations for a little bit now. Is Banchero going to be a stud? Absolutely, but there's still some question marks. How well are they going to shoot the ball? And they lost a good amount from last year. Matt Hurt, well, it's kind of funny to say. He did a lot for that team, and that's a big loss.
Yeah. All right, well, at least we're not going to have the Duke cast. ESPN would have already put that stuff out.
Right.
And I thank God this reporter that asked the question didn't ask it back in May. Otherwise, it would have been in the works, and we would all be projectile vomiting over our television sets. They would bump ESPN Plus up too, the Coach K bump. They I think it's $4.99 a month. They'd bump it to $5.99. They would.
They probably
it's disgusting.
would.
It disgusts me.
We're going to have tons of time to talk about Duke this year, I'm sure. Tons of Coach K chatter on the pod.
Should we be
that's
the
enough
only
for Duke for now.
What if maybe this is the identity we need this year? Every team's got an identity. Every podcast has an identity. What if we're the Duke Freeze show? Where we just don't talk about, we act like they don't exist.
You don't have to twist my arm on that one. I will sign the dotted line for that right now.
Maybe we'll explore that. We'll look into that. All right, that's going to do it for this first episode of Made for March. For the new season, we'll be back with some more previews, some sleeper teams that you got to look out for, some players that we're really intrigued by heading into the season. And before you know it, Champions Classic, Tuesday. It all gets started. All day college basketball. Can't wait for it. It's going to feel like March Madness. For Tim, I'm Tyler. We'll talk to you guys next week.
The game was over.